Good morning, everybody. Oh, wow, that was effective, wasn't it? Morning. It's absolutely fabulous to see so many here this morning, and very much welcome to everyone that's made the earlier start to the beginning of the new stage in innovation collaboration, very much through the Innovation Alliance for the West Midlands. And it really is fabulous to see such a fantastic turnout here this morning, because certainly, for those that don't know me, I'm Sarah Middleton, Chief Executive of Black Country Consortium, and very much certainly in a West Midlands context and in a Black Country context, innovation is absolutely essential to the future prosperity of all of our regions and our respective places. And we've been so encouraged by the depth of response from many, many different organisations across the broader region. You can see we had to move the venue due to interest, which took us slightly by surprise. But innovation is very much about collaboration, and we really welcome the warm breadth of organisations and representatives here today. We've got a bit of a new logo, you might have spotted that on the slide, and we'd very much like to extend the thanks from the Innovation Alliance to all our resourcing partners. The main ones are shown on this slide, and we very much welcome that support. Without our partners, we wouldn't actually be here today. So, just a couple of quick thoughts from myself, and clearly the timing is absolutely great for innovation, and also the relationship that has with our places. Clearly a very strong reference to that through the National Industrial Strategy, and indeed we're now working with the Combined Authority as LEPS, with the Combined Authority, and what will a local industrial strategy look like. So we'll be hearing a bit more about those dimensions later today. But certainly the Combined Authority and all of the local LEPs do recognise that innovation is absolutely the way to improve our productivity, that we all want to see a higher wage economy, and that we definitely want to see growth going to our local businesses and communities. So we've got a fantastic evidence base from which to start to develop what we hope to be a very exciting pipeline of programmes and projects, and that's through the West Midlands Science and Innovation Audit. It was an audit we decided to do, funded by the three LEPs, very much building from the audit that was done on the Midlands engine level. But again, it's important to have that evidence base, and we're very pleased that it's been supported not least by those three LEPs, but also clearly by Andy Street as Mayor for the West Midlands. So we've got loads of evidence, we've got some understanding of the qualitative and quantitative aspects of innovation, but we're also clear about the opportunities and barriers that we need to address. And this is really where we very much hope that the West Midlands Combined Authority, with its pending innovation board, will be able to help support and finance some of the emerging programmes and projects. But in order to get there, we need to create those ideas and concepts. So this is hopefully where the Alliance will be able to add value, because we see that we can create this much bigger reservoir of ideas and concepts, and that actually the more that we work collaboratively across partners, then the better it will be for all of the businesses. There really isn't a single organisation that can do this on its own. So just a final couple of thoughts from myself as introductory comments and background is that we really want to see the Alliance as a partnership between many, many different organisations that can really be the coalition of the willing, that we can really understand how through alliance and collaborative working we can really develop some grassroots thinking around what innovation programmes and projects we need in order to drive those ambitions that we have for growth. So it's not a single organisation-led approach, it's very much that partnership that we want to encourage. And hopefully the Alliance will be able to harness a fantastic pipeline that will continue to drive the success of the West Midlands economy and the broader broader region. So I think Pam now is going to outline a little bit for you about how you can get involved and what some of the next steps are. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Sarah is, of course, our chair of our new steering group, so that's why she was introducing this morning. And I'm glad to say that most of the steering group members are here as well. So as Sarah said, I am going to tell you a little bit about how you can get involved now going forward in the Innovation Alliance. I've had one or two conversations with people over coffee already. As Sarah clearly said, this is an alliance, it's a partnership, it's a bottom-up activity. So I've given you some ideas of how you can get involved, but this is not an exclusive list, and we welcome conversations with any of you about any ideas about something that you might want to bring to the party. But the key areas I've got mentioned here. So first of all, obviously, again, thank you very much to the initial resourcing partners for the Innovation Alliance that are listed here, working with us in various ways. But for everybody in this room, there are opportunities to get involved. The first thing to say is that when we did a consultation at the end of last year with all the stakeholders in Birmingham Science City, which is the precursor organisation, if you like. And the thing that came out really strongly was the strength of support for our thematic working groups that we run. And the thematic working groups are made up of, this is really the coalition of the willing. This is the people who do innovation, who are connected to the strategy, but have the ability to roll their sleeves up and get stuff done. So we've had a number of working groups running for many years. The Innovative Health Working Group, the Innovative Low Carbon Working Group have been there since the beginning of Birmingham Science City. And then more recently, we've allied ourselves with the Smart City Alliance, and we co-run that now with Rick Robinson. So those groups are open to anyone to join. We expect people to come with something to say, with something to offer, but also to listen and to be willing to participate. And if you like, those groups are where we share information and ideas, but they are also the place where some of the ideas for new collaborative projects are born. So I do encourage you to think about joining one of those groups, and I'll introduce colleagues at the end who run those groups. They run quarterly, so it's not just coming to the groups and being part of the list isn't too demanding. But the more you give, the more you get out of it. We also have a STEM engagement group. That's going through a bit of a moment of looking what its future is. It runs across the whole Midlands, actually, currently, and we run that jointly with Engineering UK. A very simple way to get involved is coming along to these events. So this is not only the launch of the Innovation Alliance, but it's the first of our new series of innovation policy and practice events. We will be running a number of those throughout the year, probably 4 or 5 a year. We welcome people to host these, to speak at these. We welcome ideas for what sort of issues we want to talk about. I think we're looking at fairly generic innovation issues, not necessarily sector-based ones. And obviously talking about the industrial strategy this morning is a really good start to that series. VentureFest West Midlands, many of you have been involved in. We've run VentureFest West Midlands for 3 years with a number of partners. We will be running it again this year. It's likely to be in September. We've not quite fixed the date yet, so a bit later than you're used to. But we are looking for people to speak, to run workshops, to sponsor, to exhibit. So that's another way of getting involved. This year's VentureFest, excuse me, will be, as well as having the usual focus on startups and having the PitchFest competition, which has been a great success for the last 3 years, we will be having a focus on business growth as well and supply chain innovation. So any ideas that you have about that, please contact us. As well as the standing working groups, we are planning to have a number of task and finish groups on key activities as we go through this year and beyond. We've got a couple of groups that are meeting for the first time in February. So Sarah talked about the Science and Innovation Audit, and one of the findings of the Science and Innovation Audit was that we had a real strength and opportunity around sustainable construction, which is not something we've focused on before. So we are going to be running a workshop in February on that theme. We have quite a number of people coming already, and we're saying only one person per organisation at the moment for the initial workshop. But as we roll that forward, there'll be the opportunity to get more involved if that's an area of interest to you. And then there's another workshop that we're planning in late February around SME innovation. So one of the findings of the Science and Innovation Audit, and something that features in the innovation strategies of all the LEPs and the Combined Authority, is about this long tail of innovation in active businesses. So what can we do about that collectively, pulling some of the business support activities that are already happening and strengthening the innovation aspects of them. So those are two workshops that we're already getting up and running, but we'll be looking to do more throughout the year. Some very exciting news. Many of you have been involved in the Consortium for the Demonstration of Intelligent Systems, or CDIS, which is a proposal that has been in development for over 2 years now. It was in the DEVO 1 deal for the Combined Authority. It's a long and laborious process getting it through the Combined Authority funding routes, but yesterday it was approved to go from outline business case to full business case, which means we're now able to draw down the initial funding, appoint a project manager and consultants to do the full Green Book full business case. So you will see some action on CDIS happening now. That's so as the title suggests, it's all around intelligent systems and their applications to energy, health and transport. So we will be looking to get people involved in the demonstrator projects that will be coming out of that project or programme. And then finally, we have already said that we couldn't be here without these organisations that are supporting us through in-kind and cash contributions. If we're going to grow and if we're going to do more, we will need more support. So I will just leave you with that thought on that slide. So finally, how you can get in touch with us if you're interested in any of these things. I very bravely put my email address up there, so expect to be inundated, and my phone number. You can follow us on Twitter, which will be, if it's not already been rebranded, will be being rebranded very soon. Our website and blog, not quite live yet, will be hopefully in the next week, but we will be having a new website. The blog will be a continuation of the one that I know a lot of you have been reading over the last years in any case. But I'm going to ask my 3 core colleagues to stand up now, please, so I can, at the end of today's session, I have to scoot off with Sarah for a steering group meeting. But if you have any questions, Alan leads on our low carbon agenda. Ian's been leading on our smart cities agenda. Jane is doing lots of other things, everything else, lots of stuff to do with the Combined Authority. We have a vacancy at the moment we're hopefully just about to fill on the innovative health area. But Alan and Ian and Jane have all been involved long enough that they can answer questions on almost anything. So please come and talk to them at the end. Thank you. So that was the end of the launch bit. I'm going to hand over to Andrew now, and we're going to carry on with our discussion about the industrial strategy.
Good. I don't need that. Good. Have we got a... there we go. Right, my welcome. Also, as you know, we've in the past been running these events 4 or 5 times a year, looking for people who have got leadership and policy involvements in innovation in the West Midlands. It's, I think, very appropriate for the first one under the new organisation for us to be focusing on the industrial strategy. As some of you will know, we've been tracking the industrial strategy during its preparation with blogs, with a workshop we had last summer, which led to an input that we put into the consultation process, which I think it's pleasing to see that some of the themes that we were exploring there have in fact come through in terms of the overall document. So I think it's extremely appropriate that we should be looking at that today, and I'm extremely pleased that we've got 2 people to introduce the topic today who've had direct first-hand involvement in this. There's Paul Drabwell, who has been very much involved in the formulation of this within BEIS, and he will give you a summary, I think, of where the strategy is heading and some of the key points on that. And then there's Professor Tim Dafforn, who, of course, is a professor in bioscience at the University of Birmingham here with a very illustrious background to him, both academically and in terms of real innovation. And he has spent some time, I think, sort of on secondment, effectively, with Biz as the chief scientist, and then with Bayes looking after this issue of entrepreneurship and so forth. He's now back in Birmingham full-time, I think, aren't you? But obviously he was very much there with a ringside seat and able to talk to us about that. So with that introduction, could I introduce Paul Drabwell, who will kick us off with this. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, I'll stand here because I don't actually have any slides, and I'm not Tim Dafforn, I'm Paul Drabwell, but I do have a couple of notes. I just thought I'd say a few words today about the government's industrial strategy, and particularly the ideas chapter within the industrial strategy, and the issue of science research, innovation and place, and as part of that collaboration, which is I think a key theme throughout the chapter, and certainly a big theme for the work going forward. But talking about collaboration networks, it's really good to come somewhere like this and to see so many different organisations coming together to talk around innovation. That in itself is a really good sign and really encouraging, I think. I should first say I oversee a team in Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy that is in the Science Research and Innovation Directorate, and we particularly look at the issue of place. So if you like, the question being really, what can science research and innovation, what can that do for the question of local growth? What can it do for local growth and productivity? And what can it do to address some of the regional economic disparities that the UK has? So that was very much one of the things that we were tasked with thinking about as we were going into developing the industrial strategy. I should start, though, with when we talk about science research and innovation policy, I should start with the government's announcement, their key commitment to increase the amount of R&D in the economy to 2.4%. I think that's kind of that is a big signal within the industrial strategy about the sort of economy that we want the UK to look like, we want the UK to be in the future. In other words, highly innovative and highly productive. So it reflects where we want to be, but it also reflects where the UK kind of is at the moment. So what I mean by that is the UK has some real strengths in research and innovation, and those strengths and areas of expertise exist across the country. And we also have some very innovative companies in the UK too. But when we look overall at the UK economy, we lag behind our competitors when it comes to the amount of R&D that's actually out there in businesses in the economy. We're currently knocking around 1.7% of GDP goes into R&D in the UK. So the push is to try and get that up to 2.4%, which is the OECD average by 2027. And then, of course, we have the issue of local and regional growth disparities across the UK as well. And again, sort of improving that will also be all about local engagement and building networks. So it's a big part of the policy push is around collaboration. And when I talk about collaboration, I mean between different institutions in a local economy, and in particular between institutions and businesses. And we see this has been a direction of travel for some time in the area of research policy, but this is where we're pushing even further now. And you see that in the industrial strategy when we talk about policies such as HIFE, the Higher Education Innovation Funding Pot, which is very much there to incentivize and encourage universities to engage with their local businesses and the economy. So that the scale of that fund increases over the coming years. And the knowledge exchange framework as well. So again, these are all different incentives designed to get institutions, in particular universities, to engage more with businesses. And that theme carries through into the question of place too. And when we looked at the issue of local and regional funding for science research and innovation, we looked at the evidence internationally to see what had worked and what hadn't worked. Now, I mean, the first thing to say is the evidence is actually quite limited and quite mixed. But when we see, and I think it's fair to say that the central government could, if it wasn't careful, could actually throw quite a lot of money away at place when it comes to research and innovation. What the evidence was telling us really is that examples of success where governments have actually managed to have an effect on local growth and productivity through the funding of science research and innovation, what came through was success tended to depend on building on an existing area of excellence or strength in a particular area, whether that's a particular sector or a discipline, and also, importantly, having strong local institutions that are collaborating together. So this theme of networks came across very strongly. So you'll see in the industrial strategy, we have announced the introduction of something called a Strength in Places Fund. That is, us beginning to look at the issue of place when it comes to science and research funding, but still building on the excellence model, really. We're still putting money towards good, strong projects, but really trying to grow areas of excellence across the country. So in order to access these funds, we're looking for consortia to come together, to come forward with projects that will demonstrate that they are building on an existing strength, but they will also enhance local collaboration, and ultimately that will feed through to some local growth and productivity premium. So that fund was announced as part of Industrial Strategy 2. So again, another example really of us working to try and incentivize institutions to collaborate together for the good of local growth and productivity. So I will just basically summarize, when it comes to science research and innovation, that is an absolute key theme within the industrial strategy. The drive to increase the amount of R&D in the economy is absolutely key, and part of that is very much about having strong institutions working with businesses. So I will stop there, and I'll happy to take any questions, but I think first is over to Tim. Anyway, thank you.
Right. Oh, yes, perfect. Okay, so thank Andrew for the brilliant introduction. So I'm a slightly odd person in some ways because I've lived on multiple sides. So I began my life as an academic and a scientist in the biosciences, went my way through to become a professor at the University of Birmingham, and then did things which academics really didn't do at that point, which is to set up companies. So I have set up 2 companies, founded one which is down the canal here, so a Brummie company, which is in high-tech medtech. And then did something which really people don't ever do, and really don't ever do, which is to leave their companies, leave their university where they're happy and things are going well, and go and work in the government. So I worked in the government, worked in BIS as chief scientist, and then BEIS as a new role, chief entrepreneurial advisor, which I completed in October. So what I want to tell you a little bit about is what I found out while I was there, and share with you the thoughts that I had while I was there, some of which ended up within the industrial strategy, other bits which didn't, but I think are relatively important. And it's interesting, actually, the last time I was in this building, I was in that room just up there, with a whole load of young Brummie entrepreneurs who I'd brought together to tell me what they required, rather than me dictating to them what was required. And it's information from talking to over 400 entrepreneurs, which I did over 6 months, that led to a lot of these findings. So it comes from the mouths of business people. So my overall view is that new businesses are really important. They stimulate competition, they raise productivity, they increase trade, and it's new businesses that drive change. In some ways, it's new businesses that drive change in large corporates as well, because a new feisty young business with a new business idea that appears on the scene tends to influence larger corporates that need to change in order to ensure they don't miss out. And all these are based on ideas. And you notice in the industrial strategy, ideas, people are a key element. They're the foundations of industrial strategy, and I completely agree with that. And in many ways, it's the alliance that we're talking about today, the Innovation Alliance, is something which brings those together. But the question for me was, where do those ideas come from, and how good are our quality of ideas? So actually, our ideas come from universities, and what we know is that we're lucky in the UK in that our ideas drive our companies. So, complex graph, but essentially the difference between the yellow and the blue is the number of companies that are driven from new ideas. Blue being those companies that are driven by necessity, e.g. someone needed to set up a small company in order to survive, generally by an iterative development of something. And so our ideas really drive business. And you can see the same with most of these countries that we would say were really leading in terms of OECD and in terms of economies. So we're lucky, we clearly have good ideas because our companies are based on ideas. Ideas are also essential when it comes to actually not just the small companies developing and coming onto the market, but also ensuring that our big companies continue to be innovative. And this is something which is really perplexing a lot of large corporates at the moment. Ideas within a corporate environment are difficult to get into the business plan of that large corporate. If you have an idea and you work for someone like Rolls-Royce, you're a small voice in a large organization that has many people who can dilute your idea. And that causes issues, really, because a lot of companies we're seeing these days, large corporates, actually iterate. They work in this iterative development pool where they change small things because they don't want to risk too much. And if they're not careful, they're competed out. So what you need is a way, and we can see how this works, of placing the top ideas, the ideas we get from our knowledge base, into large corporates, such that it moves them into an entirely new zone, a zone of high reward, perceived as a zone, as you can see up here, of high risk, but by adding and using our knowledge from our knowledge bases, we can de-risk that and ensure that our large corporates grow and grow prospectively. So ideas are important in not only creating new companies, but also ensuring that large corporates grow effectively in the UK. And it's within that industrial strategy that we're trying to drive that. So this is just to reiterate Paul's comment. R&D is important, and this is the numbers out of the Dowling Review from 2015. Fantastic review if you've not read it. It has some really excellent ideas and excellent bits of data. And one of the things it said, which I think is absolutely amazing, is for every pound you put into an R&D project, a company will get 4.2 pounds out. Now, to any company accountant, that's a pretty damn good deal. And so Paul's comment about the UK putting more money into R&D, you can see it's a multiplier that we get back. So it's an excellent idea. What I like is the second line. As a person who works part of my time in universities, is come and work with a university as a company, and we'll double that. And I think that again shows how the knowledge economy in the Midlands needs to work. We have some fantastic universities. If we can use those to drive our R&D within our companies, we're clearly going to win. So the other thing, if we do look at the way that universities engage with companies, and I think this is absolutely clear within the idea of this Innovation Alliance, trying to get that connection, that network's been mentioned so many times, tight, is really important. So working with the university increases the number of new-to-the-market innovations. And it's not surprising, it's not a surprise, shouldn't be a surprise to you, that OECD defines whether an economy is healthy as to how many new-to-the-market ideas come through companies. So working with universities really helped that. And I quite like the second figure, which is people who come and work with universities come back. They're more likely to work with the university once they've worked with them once. And I think that's a key element, that we're not as bad as we may seem. Often we look like large, ivory-towered organisations, and actually we're fairly friendly. But we could be friendlier. And the thing which I really like, and this is important when we come to the place agenda, is that small firms are much more likely to work with their local universities. If you think about it, you can't go far. You don't have large R&D arms. And so the local university and the local knowledge economy from universities is essential for growing all our businesses in the region. And we need to get that network as tight and as close as possible if we're really going to maximise the benefit. So finally, a little bit which we did about business growth and why businesses do or do not grow, and that's a big problem for us in the UK. If you actually look at a graph of business growth, what we have, which is unusual, particularly within our SME community, is a lot of businesses that stay static. They don't fail and they don't succeed, they just stay static. If you compare the same curve to that for the US, they either succeed or they die, very few stay static, and we have to think about that. And then in the small business survey, we asked people whether they'd like to grow, and they said, 2/3 said yes. Well, no shit, Sherlock. I mean, if I ask you as a business owner, do you want to grow? If you say no, it's a little bit odd. You know, if I ask you whether you want more money, you're going to say yes. What's really telling is only 25% were actually taking substantive efforts to grow. And this is something which you really need to change. And if we ask them why, it was because businesses lack the skills to grow. They lack, and this is a hard thing to say, but it's clear that businesses in the UK don't necessarily have the skills to grow into large businesses. And again, this is where networks work importantly, and where something like the Innovation Alliance could be important. Helping businesses to access locally advice on how to grow their businesses is essential. And this brings it into international context. This is our management practice skill. This is the ability for us to run our businesses, particularly from the SME community. And we're definitely in the second division. You can see there. We're below Canada, Sweden, Germany, Japan, and in fact, what worries me is we're quite close to Italy, and I really would expect that we can run businesses better than Italy can. But we can't. And that's terrible, because we have the fantastic ideas, we have the great knowledge, we have a great knowledge economy, the best universities in the world, but perhaps we're not maximizing the use of those ideas. And just to give you an idea, if we could enhance this and you know, it'll be interesting to see how the industrial strategy works through this, if we could enhance this to the US level, then it's like increasing labour force by 6%. At a time when labour force numbers are low, what a fantastic thing to do, it increases productivity. And if you look at the skills, I'm not going to go into this in too detail, but the skills are just the skills you would expect. There's nothing special. People, management strategy, formalised systems, new market entry, obtaining finance, operational improvement, all stuff that we know about, but we need to do better. So we need the ideas, we need the skills, we need the people, all together, driven by networks, and we can grow businesses. So finally, in summary, from the studies in Bayes, sorry, it keeps dropping out. The quality of the ideas we have is fantastic. Our university sector is world-beating. In fact, when I used to travel around as chief scientist, the first question that most of the other chief scientists and science ministers in other countries used to say is, how can we generate your university system? Now, there were two answers, and the answer which I enjoyed giving was sucking through my teeth, huffing a bit, and then saying, well, have you got 1,000 years? Our first university started 1,000 years ago. And they look at you and they say, and that's the end of the conversation. We have 1,000 years worth of academic prowess, which doesn't get built overnight, and we should make sure we use it. We start businesses well. The number of businesses starting up has gone up hugely. And actually, the UK is an easy place to do business. I talked to some entrepreneurs in the west coast of the States, a place which is well known for its entrepreneurial spirit. They couldn't believe that we could set up a company by going online and paying some money and registering our company, and that was it. They have to get permits from at least 5 different organisations in the West Coast, each costing money, each requiring to be done in the right sequence, each requiring lawyers. So we do have a fabulous place to do business. What the UK does less well, I think, is obviously growing on the success of the knowledge base we have and growing those into large-scale corporates, large-scale businesses. We know this. We tend to dump out. An investor friend of mine said he can tell a UK business pitch because it's the one which has the last slide which says exit. If you've got a good business idea, why would you consider exiting? Why wouldn't you grow it until it's large? I think it might be part of our psyche, but I think we can do something about that. Business management, as shown, needs to be improved considerably, and then translating that ambition, that drive into growth is key. But all this has to work, and will work through networks. A network between the local economy, the local universities, who of course, don't forget, provide huge numbers of trained guys or graduates into the economy as well. And also local government and local business leaders. The whole lot together could be fabulous. And I think Birmingham's got a great place. Thanks.
Great. Paul. Good. So now we can throw the floor open. Perhaps I'd just like to ask Paul one first question, which is, obviously there's a tremendous amount of excellent stuff in the industrial strategy, at least that's my opinion. But one of the questions that I have is what's the sort of process now for implementing that? And when are we likely to see some of the things that are being talked about in there actually, the rubber hitting the road?
Okay, well, certainly on the science, research, and innovation side, a lot of the deliverables are actually backed up with money and new funds. So, and so we are in the throes of establishing a new organisation, UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, who will be overseeing this funding and putting it through various organisations, through universities, research councils. And when it comes to the fund I talked about with Strengthening Places, that will be something that will be led by Research England and Innovate UK. So stuff like that will be delivered through the existence of new funds. And there are other commitments throughout the industrial strategy, and there is a team in BEIS, an industrial strategy team, and they will be overseeing all the deliverables and ensuring they get delivered and tracked. We're also establishing an industrial strategy commission, which will be an independent group that will look at how the industrial strategy is delivered and to some extent be holding us to account on that delivery. That group is yet to be established, so, yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, questions. We need to use the microphone, so who wants to go first? Malcolm.
Thank you very much, Malcolm Harbour. I'm on the Council of the University of Birmingham, but I was member of the European Parliament for 15 years, and also on the board of Birmingham Science City. One thing that, and I think many people here know that I'm an enthusiast for this, so I'm first off the mark with this, about local solutions. One thing that neither of you mentioned in detail was the energy for new solutions in the public sector, in local councils, in hospitals, and the health service. And one of the things that I've been working on with the Local Government Association is how to make the whole procurement process far more innovative. And the experience of that, the Americans are good at it, the Swedes are good at it, the Finns are good at it, is you actually start up businesses in a much more powerful way because they're working with an end customer. And so my plea to the West Midlands Innovation Alliance is that one area where locally we could really establish a name for ourselves is if in the health and in the construction sectors and with local authorities, we set up a really innovative system in training and getting public procurers to encourage innovative solution providers. And in the industrial strategy, and I have read all 131 pages of it, there is actually a GovTech fund that's been launched this week. I got onto Government Digital Services yesterday because there's no paperwork about it. And they told me it does apply to local authorities. And so I've already written a piece to go out about that. But actually, the disappointment about the industrial strategy is the Green Paper had a whole chapter about the importance of procurement as one of the 10 pillars of industrial strategy, and that wasn't translated anywhere into your 131 pages.
Tim, do you want to come in on that?
I can probably make two comments on that. On the first instance, I absolutely agree with you. Procurement-driven innovation, as exemplified by, say, DARPA in the States, which is used as a big example and actually is more complicated than many people realise, is something which other countries use significantly. And we have large procurers, as you say. So the NHS is the example that hits me between the eyes every day when I'm trying to run my business. And I think there are two ways around this. I mean, I think there's the official route, which is setting up large organisations and ensuring that, someone, and there are parts of the government that oversee this sort of stuff. And that's effective to a certain degree, and it's an important thing to do. But there's also, part of the network idea here. Networks are quite important for doing this. So what we find in our own company when we're trying to engage with the NHS is actually you can engage through procurers in the NHS if you know how to do it, and you have a lead medic, for instance, or a commissioning group that really want it. And having learnt that, what we realised it was about companies learning that, about someone holding that information and allowing that to happen and ensuring that there is a dating agency, if you like, between the two. So I think you can do it nationally, but really effective regionally if you can get it to work as well. Okay, brilliant.
I think I might add that this particular feature is a key part in enabling companies to be high-growth companies rather than exiting companies. Absolutely. I think is a key part of that. I think we've got a question back there. Is that right? Yes, you. Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Keith Budden. I work for the Centre of Excellence for Low Carbon and Fuel Cell Vehicles. We're a research and technical organisation, so an independent not-for-profit. I was very pleased to hear a discussion about collaboration, about working together. One of the areas that we've been developing is around joint ventures. Our challenge has been we've got some fantastic IP, some great skills, but no way of bringing that to market. So actually being able to think of a corporate for-profit route that brings together academics, we're working with some large universities, large corporates and small corporates and ourselves as an RTO to try and commercialize some of that IP, but in a different structure. So it's not just about an SME becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. It's about maybe we can think more how to turn some of those collaborative ideas into joint ventures. And really plea for, I think, more support and help. It's taken us a year in legal and quite heavy legal fees to try and set up that joint venture. With very little support to bring that together into a new business that can then really commercialize that knowledge and take that out into the marketplace and create jobs and wealth, but in a different company, in a different structure. We think that approach could work better, so maybe plea for how more support and more guidance could be put into bringing joint ventures together that enable that collaboration to bring that new way of working to market more quickly, rather than just thinking of have to build a small business to get bigger or make a large corporate more innovative.
Yeah, good question. Which of you wanted to go first on that, Paul?
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I mean, what strikes me, having been around the country somewhat and looking at all sorts of interesting things going on in different institutions, is that there are all sorts of different interventions needed for different types of businesses. But part of the answer to that is things like growth hubs, and putting money in and expertise into those growth hubs that can help businesses with just business advice, commercial advice, that sort of thing. Some of it's about showing companies the value of adopting existing innovations, if you like, and some of it is around very much around new inventions and IP and helping commercialize that. And I think we need all those things, but a lot of it will be done at the local and regional level.
It sounds like a complex way of doing things, potentially, but maybe an innovative way of doing things. I think, as you know, as soon as you start using something which is slightly innovative and different, then the overhead's going to be larger. The only thing I would ask is that success you need to share, and that's again the network thing, how you manage to get to where you're going. Often you're successful in making these new joint ventures or making a new business structure. You then don't share how you got there and whether it was worthwhile. And it's learning across the piece, which is absolutely key as well, coming back through, say, growth hubs or through organisations like this and saying where the hitch points were. One of the really interesting things which came out of our study was we discovered that people couldn't run businesses, or they can run businesses, that's really strong, but they have trouble running their businesses. And we asked them whether government should come in there with civil servants or whoever and teach them. And there was a certain amount of this going on. And rightly so. And I said, well, where do you want to learn from? They said, well, ideally, when we've got a business hitch, we'd like to learn from the person who's just got over that hitch. And peer-to-peer was really important. So can I say that if you're going to go through this route and you are successful, make sure you engage the network and you engage in peer-to-peer communication so people can understand what went wrong. You may take a hit on it, but others shouldn't.
I think there is an issue here, though, in that growing a small company is very tough. And what is difficult is getting that first big order, as it were. And that's where a bigger company has got the mass and the existing reach to be able to do it. So I think there's a real issue here, which is to how you can make that work, how you can bridge that gap. And I think the industrial strategy says something on that, but not, that's still work to be done, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's quite a few areas where there's still work to be done. But absolutely, I think what we recognise. I talked a little bit about growth hubs, but it comes back to a lot of the stuff that Tim was talking about when it comes to management and leadership in organisations, and that across the UK we have what's sometimes referred to as a fairly long tail of companies that could be more productive, and certainly in amongst those there's a few sort of like 3 or 4 handful of basic things that we felt if they could up their game in those areas, then we would see benefits, and growth hubs will be key to sort of to looking at that. And a lot of that is about yes, leadership and management, adopting actually what to some companies will not be innovation at all, but actually, just digitalizing, for example, so some pretty basic things. But as I say, there's a whole range of different things that are needed for different companies. But I would back up what Tim said as well. That in some respects, government can come up with policies. But if you want to know how to run and grow a business, don't ask a civil servant. You need to talk to other businesses that have been through it and create those networks.
Over there.
Thank you. Mike Woolacott. I'm chair of the Low Carbon Working Innovation Group as well, and Greenwatt Technology. Question really for Tim. Intrigued on your research on the entrepreneurism, and I want to refer to the kind of classic valley of death, and I would suggest that a lot of innovators and some entrepreneurs sit on the precipice of the valley of death for a long, long time, because actually the risks of going down into that valley, whether it's cash flow, wages, capital investment, are just too high, and they prefer to stay a small business, a successful small business. And this isn't necessarily related to skills, and I just wonder how, is that a bad philosophy, or is there something that can help them to parachute across the valley and get onto the other side and be successful?
I think we need to discriminate between two types of company there. So one of the things which I got beaten over the head by was the 20% of companies that don't grow at all, or 20% that don't want to grow and don't grow. So they actually aspire not to grow. And they're happy where they are. And actually there was a lot of hassle from ministers about those and saying, well, what are they for? Why are they there? Now, their livelihood, they used to be called lifestyle business, which is rubbish. I mean, they're not young yummy mummies or yummy daddies making jam at home and selling it online. They're companies that have decided that they want to be in this space, and often they don't have a market to go into, and they're maintaining something for their families. We should leave those guys alone. My own family business is growing and undertaking business is difficult, so they're always going to be in the 20%. Unless, as my father is, you happen to be a good shot. That's not a good way to grow your business, but it is the only option. I think on the other side of things, I think the Valley of Death thing, I've lived on the Valley of Death, and what we've noticed from other really effective ecosystems where people traverse that Valley of Death in great style is back to this peer-to-peer. It's two things. One is peer pressure. So if you're setting up a tech business and the other tech businesses around you are growing outwards and growing bigger, it drives you upwards. And there's some really good evidence from the Babson Business School over in the States about this effect. And it drives you forwards because of the Me Too. If Fred next door is now driving a Mercedes and you were driving an Austin Maestro, then you're probably going to want to move across and see what he's doing. And the other one is that peer-to-peer learning of seeing what they've done and talking to them about what they've done and realizing it's not as mad and bad as it could be, and the benefits could be considerable. So there's a confidence factor in there. All that works only if you meet people, and if you meet other people in that area. And what you find in regions that work is they have a great ecosystem where entrepreneurs meet regularly, people are talking to one another, it's vibrant, and it happens. Bristol's a classic example where in their economy, particularly in their creative economy, it's astonishing the connections you can see. You can talk to one person at one meeting, they'll know a huge network of people, and that's really important. It's one place where I might say, if I was being at all critical of the Midlands, it's not quite working yet. And that's why I'm quite excited to come back and work with you guys, because I think it's something we could really get kicked off.
At the back, there we go.
Simon Slater, Sustainability West Midlands. Have the panel got any tips for what a good local industrial strategy would look like? Because we're having to create one now.
No stress then.
I
think clearly it has to reflect your local strengths. I mean, that's absolutely essential. You can't, I think, you can't build a region into something it isn't, because it's going to be seen straight through immediately. And so you need to look deep into yourselves and think about where the strengths are. Then you need to understand where those weaknesses are preventing that strength from coming to the fore and really growing and blossoming. And I'd focus on those. And I think, if you can tell a story that the Midlands, for instance, we know it's got a great medtech sector. It's got a great medtech sector, which is ranked here, but it could be here, and here's the data which shows why it's not making it, and here are the interventions backed by evidence, perhaps from other regions, that allow that to happen, and they're innovative new ways of ensuring that a sector will grow. I mean, it's hard to turn that down, because you've shown the problem, you've shown the opportunity, and then you've shown the solution backed by data.
Well, that's pretty much exactly what I was going to say. Strengths, it's got to be, and backed up with evidence as well. So, you know, sometimes sitting in Whitehall, we can be a bit, how can I put this, tabloid-esque about the world in terms of, how can I put this, a certain area is good at med tech. The West Midlands is all about, manufacturing or whatever. When actually, places that are a bit more complex, or much more complex than that. So really think about what your USP is, really. So if it's med tech, but is it just med tech, or is it something real? Have you got real sort of expertise in a particular part of med tech? So these things do break down into all sorts of specialisms. Sectors is a very clumsy way of looking at the world, actually, but evidence it as well, absolutely, because there's always that danger as well that there's 10 or 15 places across the UK all bidding to be the national centre for something or other. But so you need to evidence it.
Yeah, I think it's a very important message here that the industrial strategy effectively provides an open door for people to push on about well-founded local initiatives and activities here.
That's right.
And therefore, I think there's a thing for everybody to carry away from here today, is that that's something that really does need to have some focus and attention. And if good ideas come through, I think what you're saying is that the arrangements and mechanisms are there to be actually be able to push those forward.
That's right. We continue to think about how we can help localities to evidence these strengths. So it was my team sort of oversaw, or not, I say oversaw the science and innovation audits. Actually, all the work was actually done by people out in places doing it, but we sort of set up the framework for that, which West Midlands adopted also. So that's part of the story in terms of looking for the evidence. But we also have things like the Smart Specialisation Hub, which is a body that we sponsor, which is trying to corral evidence around research and innovation and what localities are good at. Again, so the question for us going forward is how can we use those vehicles, or is it different vehicles, to try and support localities in their evidence building when it comes to working out what your local industrial strategy should be. So I think there's a role for central government in supporting localities with evidence too. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Question there.
Good morning. John Bloomfield from the Climate Knowledge Innovation Community, which focuses on low carbon innovation development. I wanted to explore something which has come up in the discussion and which I was a bit concerned with in Paul's presentation, which is, I think, I very much welcome the emphasis on place, and the recognition of its crucial role in economic development. But if one talks endlessly about, as the first point, looking at existing strengths, then if you look at the UK as a whole, that's a way of just reinforcing the predominance of London, which, as you can tell, is where I come from, and Oxford and Cambridge, and we're meant to be trying to get beyond that. And also doesn't look enough at potential. And obviously in an area that I'm involved in, which is the green economy, there's huge potential everywhere, So how do you balance looking at, some existing strengths, but how do you look at potential, well-founded potential, but nevertheless potential, so that within the scenarios that colleagues are talking about, and for example in Malcolm's suggestions on public procurement, you're looking at new things, not just we build on what we've already got.
And I think they're really good points, and they're very points we have been grappling with. So in the UK, you've got this interesting scenario where a lot of our science research and innovation funding goes towards what we call the Golden Triangle: Cambridge, Oxford, and universities in London. Nearly 50% of funding goes there. Having said that, we actually underestimate the levels of excellence that actually exist outside the Golden Triangle. So we had to grapple with, well, do we sort of start just spreading the jam in this sense and kind of almost begin dismantling the agglomeration of excellence, if you like, that we have in the Golden Triangle and start spreading it? Bearing in mind that actually is we're also competing internationally, and that Golden Triangle helps, is internationally competitive. So we're concerned not to kind of undo what we have that is good. Rather, we've come to the conclusion we want to just grow the amount of excellent science and research that we have across the country. So in other words, rather than sort of spreading what we have already, let's focus on other nodes across the country where we can see really good stuff happening, and there is a lot of it actually, and just seek to grow it. Now that is, now the thinking behind that is to grow it in nodes across the country. The fund I was talking about, if now we're not creating a scheme where we're ruling any parts of the country out, but I think it's fair for me to say if we saw significant amounts of money through that fund going to the Golden Triangle, then in some way we will have failed in our mission. So we're certainly not seeking to do that. I should also distinguish between research and innovation and other policy interventions too. So when I say you need to focus on or we could waste money, and in order to sort of get good value for money for projects, when it comes to research and innovation, we should be backing good projects. I'm very much talking about research and innovation there. So in certain parts of the country, there are interventions that are needed, but you wouldn't start necessarily with focusing on research and innovation. You might be doing a lot of innovation adoption interventions and things like that. So there are interventions that are needed across the country. But when it comes to research and innovations, we are talking about sort of growing on strengths or emerging strengths. Because you're right. There is a balance to be struck. So.
Question there.
I think one of the concerns I have, what I've heard so far, is there's this sort of assumption that you go from university, innovation, new business, a linear relationship. Actually, I would suggest the West Midlands, and the Midlands in general, most of the applicable innovation is coming from the private sector. And I think there's a great danger in just looking at research and grants from universities as the driver for innovation.
I mean, again, I really agree with that. I think we tend to talk a lot about universities in the UK because our system is very much oriented that way. A lot of our money flows through universities. So from our perspective, we want to get the most out of that, and we want them to engage with the economy and get sort of more bang for our buck in the economy, if you like. But you're absolutely right. And again, so when I talk about the Strength in Places Fund, I talk about consortia coming together. It doesn't have to be university-led by any means. It's just that often in parts of the country it will be. But the whole point of this is, a large point of the industrial strategy is about growing the amount of R&D in the economy, in businesses actually. So.
Do you want to come on?
I mean, it's not a single solution, and it shouldn't be necessarily a single solution directed through universities. And I think, as you showed on the figures there, any R&D enhancement in a company enhances the outcome considerably. I should say the other thing to remember is, and it was on Radio 4 yesterday, the drive towards things like degree apprenticeships, where it's not necessarily the generation of the idea that's occurring in the university sector. What it is the quality of the people who have got the knowledge at the cutting edge that can then go and work with companies or in companies and help to upgrade their R&D. That's a separate route as well, which I think is really important, and particularly the degree apprenticeships, where you've got a close mating between what the company is doing and the training that's being gained. It's much closer than it is in the traditional graduate, do a degree, leave, go to university. It's a much more partnered approach, and I think that has an importance as well.
I think that is a very key point, because a business that's got an application-driven innovation, I think often needs to be able to access the best academic input it can to support it in that. And I think there is a danger that the linear model sort of blinkers people's eyes to the fact that actually what you need is a ability for companies to engage with universities, if you like, on more directed dimensions.
Can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
65% of digital businesses in this country prefer self-taught coders than they require university coders. So skills, absolutely. It is the biggest, closest link between Gazelle businesses and the university. It's actually skills, absolutely agree. But it's by far not the only source of skills.
Yeah. But you also need to want to access the best people, if you're a company doing something interesting. There's a question over there, please, at the back. Sorry, there. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it comes back to networks again. Absolutely. This is the point. It's you know. Yeah.
There's a question with the microphone there, please.
Sorry. Sorry about that. Russ Taylor from Capital Limited. Now here we've got the Innovation Alliance. We already know we've got the Midlands Innovation Universities, the Midlands Enterprise University groupings. So we've got a very good collaborative setup already in terms of institutional requirements. But there's a huge requirement or need for shared knowledge, shared data sets, and a means to create shared infrastructure to exchange that. Now, in Reading, Hugh Kerner a few years ago set up what was called the Janet Shared Data Room to allow such collaboration between university institutions and between those institutions and their industrial commercial partners. Now, the impact of that was that collaborative projects that took 9 to 12 months to see through are now being completed in less than 6 weeks. Now, we do not have anything like that kind of infrastructure capability here in the Midlands. When are you going to invest in it?
Okay, I mean, well, you know,
It's
certainly
a
a
question
wider
to us,
level.
I think, rather than speakers.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I've been around the country and seen some examples. I mean, Glasgow is another. There's really interesting stuff happening there too. But we don't define. I mean, it's just the nature of how we fund in this area. We don't prescribe what local areas or what local universities should be doing. We just set out the framework that encourages them to do things like this. So it's whatever is appropriate for the West Midlands. You know, we hope the institutions there will start doing those sorts of things. But I don't know if.
Yeah, I think anything that enhances the speed at which data, ideas, whatever, moves out of universities or out of those institutions into the economy has to be good. Our own experience of trying to do similar probably met with similar time delays. So just move, if you like, the idea of moving stuff from my own research into my own company takes time. And I think a maturing of that idea, and whether it's through data room type processes, which are regional. I mean, why should they be regional? Why can they not be, you know, UK wide? I think that's a little short-sighted, but I think something like that really could help. And I've seen it as an inhibitor. It's an inhibitor of enthusiasm as well. If it takes you that long, by the time you've got to the end of the process, you've often lost the will to live.
I think that's something that you might want to raise with us afterwards, because I think that's an important idea in that. Now, we've got several questions. I've lost track of where we are now. Yes, okay, we'll take there. Yes.
Thanks. I'm Andrew Mayer from the Midlands Aerospace Alliance. I want to follow up the point that was being made about the direction in which innovation takes place, and an observation, really, that we're in danger of missing out some of the critical economic models that make our industries work in big supply chain-driven industries like aerospace and automotive. Because on the one hand, we have a sector-driven policy nationally, which focuses mostly on the large companies in aerospace. Most of the innovation funding goes to the large companies, very little of it comes through to the small ones. And then we've got the opposite of that currently with the local agenda. The local agenda exemplified by what we've heard about today, which is based, if you'll pardon me saying this, on the old university spin-out startup model of Silicon Valley, biotech, etc. And we have whole segments of the UK economy that simply don't function in that way whatsoever. Most of the research that takes place in aerospace at universities has been put there by the large companies. It didn't start at the universities. It's been put into the universities by the large companies so they can get the public sector subsidies. Most of our supply chain development doesn't need to connect to a university. So the different innovation model isn't the small companies coming to the universities. The small companies need to network with the big companies and get that entrepreneurial drive going. And we do an enormous amount of work to support those companies, but it's missing currently, I think, in the current the white paper. The green paper was actually better in many ways than the white paper in terms of the focus on regions and regional networks. So it's an observation, really. We're in danger of missing this. We're in danger of missing the regional scale. We've only got a national and a local because the Midlands engine, well, we're not quite sure where it's being driven at the moment or who's driving it or whether there's any fuel in the tank, et cetera, et cetera. And it would be a shame if we missed some of these different economic models. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, the baby that you've been talking about.
So are you talking about like local sector deals, effectively?
No.
No.
Well, possibly yes, for some sectors that might be the local sector deal. The ceramics case study has come up again. But it may be a regional sector deal. It may be a national sector deal that actually includes the supply chain, not the small companies. Whether we do it top down or bottom up, there's something that I worry about that we're going to miss.
I think that's a fair point, and I think when you read the industrial strategy, I think it's fair to say one could potentially begin to worry that there's this sort of, well, I don't know, this sort of focus on the spin-out model or the linear model, whatever you want to call it. But I think perhaps to a degree, but that we do have lots of interventions that are doing other things. So I talked a little bit, and I'm going to talk about universities again, but I think the thing to recognise is that in the area I work in, a lot of the funding just does flow through universities. And we don't just fund them to focus on patents and IP and new, that sort of cutting edge innovation. And of course, when you have a strategy like the UK's industrial strategy, we do naturally start talking about lots of the kind of new and shiny stuff, if you like. But we do recognise that a lot of innovation is actually can be about process innovation or incremental innovation or simply collaboration. And we do have funds that are very much sort of incentivising institutions to just engage with businesses and create, knowledge exchange and things like, and it's not all about, the knowledge exchange in its various forms, things like this, so it's not just about the linear model. And then we do have sector interventions like sector deals that really are there to try and ask the sector themselves, ask businesses themselves, what are the things that government could do to help improve productivity or unlock growth in that sector, and that'll be a number of things. And yes, I'm sure you're right, often there will be about relationships between supply chain companies and large companies.
Only a quick one. There were, when talking to the entrepreneurs as we did over a period of time, one of the things that did come up quite regularly was closed shop supply chains for large corporates, and it's a difficult one to make a decision on, actually, because you'd get an entrepreneur coming to you saying, I've got this fantastic idea which could revolutionise the supply chain of X large corporate. I just can't get in there. Now, it's a difficult one to answer on a single discussion, because you don't know whether what they've got is really appropriate, whether it's as big as it is. And I think we know that large corporates, having innovative products coming through their supply chains is essential, and innovation through those companies coming through. So actually, any large corporate that does that and doesn't look at the supply chain, the variation of supply chains that can be out there, and the new innovative companies could add into their supply chains, is probably not doing themselves any good. So maybe that should be, some of that onus should be on the large corporates to open their eyes, to realise actually, when it comes down to it, there are some innovative companies that are generating new ideas that can help them in the supply chain. But that's a difficult thing to actually enable.
Okay, we're getting near the end here. Norman, you've been trying to get in for a while. Wait for the mic.
Hi, I'm Norman Price, former chair of Birmingham Science City. One thing that concerns me when I came, and concerns me more now, is the distinction between research and innovation. And we're putting the two together in the night. And some of us who've worked in Whitehall for the last 20 years have seen that happening and seen it with a certain amount of concern. Does that mean we're going to be more research and ideas driven, or more innovation and wealth driven? Most of the debate we've had this morning has been the former. It's about research and ideas driven. We've used the golden triangle, we've used all those kind of methods. We've used the concept of excellence. I don't know what it means, except what the peer group on various research bodies consider to be excellent. And so, are we drifting more to the ideas-driven innovation, or more to the market-driven innovation? At this moment in time, I'm very uncomfortable.
Well, I would say, if you have the impression that we're drifting more and more just to doing more and more of research stuff that is sitting in universities, then you've got the wrong impression, and I've given the wrong impression today, because I don't think that's the case. I particularly talked about how to make that more impactful and to have those engagement with the economy. But we're putting a lot of money into innovation. We have the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, which is put through Innovate UK, and that's very much in the innovation space. And that's a huge focus, So so my short answer is no. Actually, it's not about just putting more money through research.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the fights I had when I was Director of Knowledge Transfer in Life Sciences in Birmingham is lots of people coming up with science which they thought could be turned into good ideas, when actually what we needed is challenges and commercial challenges that could be solved. Mm-hmm. And actually that pull wasn't happening. It's happening more. And some of it is down to, I'm afraid, my own community's big-headedness that we can solve the world's problems. We just don't know what they are. When actually what we really need to do is to listen to the economy, listen to industrialists and understand what their problems are. And more often than not, what we actually discovered is I took a number of academics into rooms with corporates where they had problems, and they were slightly, the academics were very reserved in those rooms and felt that the difficulties were probably boring and mundane. And what they inevitably came out with was questions that they had never heard before and challenges that were really difficult and that they really wanted to engage with. So I think the pull is absolutely essential. But you need two things, because sometimes you don't know what the pull is. So you need ideas to generate entirely new sectors, but you need existing sectors to pull through and challenge so you can deploy the brains where you need them. It's a combination of two, and the balance needs to be right.
Okay, we're running out of time now. I've got 3 hands up, which look like they're all bursting to speak. So what I'll do is we'll take the 3 questions quickly in sequence, and then we'll have the final comment. So starting with you at the back there.
So morning, my name's Andrew Steele. I run what was a digital manufacturing startup. So a lot of what you've just spoken about is very key. Couple of comments and then a question or an observation. I agree completely that there's a place for university. My innovation in my team comes internally from my people based on our market requirement, not from academia. I have to go through probably a year period of washing my students and interns into a market-led mentality rather than an ideas-led mentality. To gentleman's point at the front there, you said the hardest thing is the first order. No, it is absolutely not. The hardest thing is year 1, year 2, when you're trying to move from a 2-3-man band to a proper nucleus of a functional company. And the challenge and the comment I have back to you guys is there is money and innovation available, and I've worked for a large corporate, and I've seen it flowing into the top of academia and into the top of the corporates and gets nowhere near the SME land where the innovation is. The challenge is, how do we invigorate those companies? How do we inject that help, finance, leadership into them?
Great, thank you. And now down here, and then the other ones at the back there.
Thank you. Yeah, just
no. Go ahead.
Just building a little bit on some of these comments. There's been a lot of talk around companies and large corporates, SMEs, and also universities. But actually, my comment is related to work that we're doing in the transport arena, working actually with local authorities as well. So we're missing a lot, I think, in this conversation around actually what the client needs are, certainly where public services are concerned, or services related to fitting into a public service delivery, in this case transport, but it's wider than that. And the experience that we've had, albeit quite a kind of slow, local, open innovation process, is working with BCU, is working with some SMEs, is working with the public sector to bridge that gap bit that you were saying. We don't know what the problem is, tell us what the challenges are. And this cycle seems to be going on, and what the experience that we've had, which I think has certainly proved very useful in its earlier stages, and I think should be considered further, is actually bringing a collaborative team together, a bit related to your point as well, with public sector, private sector, volunteer sector as well, to actually really help the behaviour and the cultural bit. If we can start to bring those people together and learn those skills through the process, then we can start to make that change happen.
Okay, thank you. Do we have one question at the back there? Just the final question, just a little comment.
Paul Forrest, the West Midlands Economic Forum. I thought it was interesting on one of your slides that the economies that were more innovative than the UK all have significantly larger manufacturing sectors than we have, and perhaps we need to look at manufacturing. But you keep calling for evidence-based analysis. What happens if the data is wrong? Last week, I mean, what happened? We think that the ONS data significantly undercalculates the productivity of the West Midlands economy, that in aerospace and in automotive, per capita GVA, per worker GVA is substantially better than anything achieved in the City of London. Last week, the Office of National Statistics admitted they'd got inflation wrong. They'd also missed off the productivity impact of digitalisation in the manufacturing sector. And yesterday, they admitted that they can't actually calculate service sector exports. And rather than being a service sector export-driven economy, it's probably a fallacy. It's actually the manufacturing sector that's leading exports. And perhaps you need to challenge your data and actually really understand what's going on. In terms of the Golden Triangle, if you net out the public subsidies that Oxford and Cambridge universities get, the West Midlands economy is the most innovative in terms of research and design expenditure. So perhaps less London-centric a priori assumptions that London's always best and look at the regions better would come up with a better industrial strategy.
Good, okay. Sounds so there's some agreement with you there. Just final words then from our speakers.
Those are three great questions, which I'm probably not going to attempt to maybe I can do it in one word, so a number of words. But I think collaboration with private sector, with public sector is essential. And why not have a public sector challenge fund so everyone knows what's going on, which involves SMEs? That would be really interesting. In terms of the data, I couldn't agree more. I'm a person who works off data, and so when I did, for instance, the entrepreneurship review, I combined data. So I talked to the economists, heard what they said, and then talked to people, and got the two. And I was told that the people data was called anecdata, like anecdotal data, but actually the two match, and then you have some confidence. I think these figures, running an economy by the figures is a difficult thing to do. You also have to feel and talk to people. I love your comment about the West Midlands. And then in terms of trained people and people knowing about a real market, that is a real failing of universities. One of the other things I wrote a letter to the Prime Minister about enterprise education about any business, any real world. Only 4.3% of all graduates have ever learned anything about business in our universities. The question to you is that too few? I would suggest so, but I'll leave it to you. And that's based on data, whether it's dodgy or not.
Again, I agree on data. Having been involved in science and innovation audits, of course, data is really difficult. You have to get beneath the aggregate. That's part, and there's lots of issues and limitations with data, which is why I mentioned earlier that I think there is a bit of a role for central government to try and help localities sort of navigate through that data. It is complicated and and imperfect. I think also ultimately, I don't think it's right for someone in, London or Whitehall to determine what are the right interventions in any particular area. And I think it's very much we're trying to create a framework by which, locally you create the networks and then you decide, and we can help somehow support the institutions and the interventions that are needed. It's not necessarily about universities. I just want to finish with sort of one example, because I agree with Tim's point as well. We can't sit at our desks and just run the country by looking at data. You have to get out there and look and see what's going on. And there is lots of interesting stuff going on. We talked about manufacturing, for example, and there's things like this, the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Sheffield, who are running an apprenticeship scheme, and it's really interesting to see these young people. Again, it comes back to skills. A lot of the manufacturing industries around the Sheffield area, their levels of productivity do not reflect the fact that they've got an innovation centre in that area. But I'm quite optimistic that over time things will improve, because they are just pumping in new blood into these small manufacturers in their area, new apprentices who are being shown new ways of doing things, and they will go into those companies, and they may not invent new things, but they are already, I've shown a couple of examples where they've improved the processes in those organizations, that sort of incremental process innovation. So it is happening. It's just trying to get it, and it's not all about cutting edge universities, but it is, it's a mix of interventions. Anyway, I'll stop there.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. My thanks to all of you for coming here today and for participating in this lively conversation. And obviously, if you want to make sure that you keep in touch with us about the future events, which we'll be announcing as soon as we can. So my thanks again to the speakers for coming along and giving their time for us this morning. If we could just thank them. Thank you very much. And have a good remainder of the day.